Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Digital Peacebuilding Community of Practice. We will be started in just a few minutes. Happy almost Thanksgiving.
The
Canadians already had their Thanksgiving week, just so you know.
When is Canadian Thanksgiving?
It was like last month or something, during normal harvest time.
I'm being US centric. I'm taking the week off of Thanksgiving, so clearly I'm looking forward to it. October 9th. Thank you, Thomas. Welcome everybody.
Hello everyone. Good evening from Harare.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, where you're all located. We are going to be starting in just a few minutes. Yes, Perlene, this comment, do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, please. Drop your name, where you're tuning in from, what organization you're associated with. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Hi, Katie. Hi, Raju. Hi, Will. Good to see you all here. Okay, well, I'm gonna take off now and get started. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the November session of Alliance for Peacebuilding's Digital Peacebuilding Community of Practice. So good to see you all here. Really excited for today's session, which will feature Jamie Arkin of AI Fluence, or iFluence. Wait, how do you say it again, Jamie? Is it iFluence?
iFluence. Yeah.
iFluence. Okay, perfect. So just a bit of background on Jamie as a speaker. Jamie is the Director of Partnerships and Development at iFluence, where she leads the sub-brand called iFluence Reach, which focuses on how iFluence's platform and approach can be utilized to solve some of the biggest hurdles in the development sector. Jamie has worked in technology for the development sector in East Africa for the past 7 years. She has supported INGOs, UN agencies, and bilateral donor partners to launch innovative technology solutions in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Somalia. Jamie focuses on the collaboration between traditional for-profit marketing mechanisms and the crossover capabilities of these digital tools for improving advocacy and impact measurement in the development space. She holds a Master's of Public Health from Tulane University. So today's session, we're going to explore how iFluence is flipping the influencer model on its head by working with regular people across social media, using their own creativity and authentic voices to promote peace and fight misinformation across social media platforms. Jamie will talk about how iFluence uses AI and how they are creating a circular communication economy, collecting rapid feedback, and building peer-to-peer communication strategies at scale across Africa and India. They will share their experience using social media influencers to improve civic education and promote peace around the 2022 Kenyan election. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie. But before I do just want to say, if you are joining the Community of Practice for the first time, and you're not on the mailing list, do feel free to email me and just request to be added. I'm going to drop my email address in the Zoom chat momentarily. So thank you all, and Jamie, over to you.
Awesome. Well, hi, everybody. It's good to meet you all virtually today. Let me switch over to my PowerPoint and kind of jump right in. So a little bit about what we're here today. I'm talking about iFluence Reach, which is, as mentioned, a division in iFluence, where we focus on how we can utilize social media to communicate with our target audience. And so iFluence is a Kenyan company, and we work across Africa and India. And in these markets, one of the biggest challenges we face is mass communication. Where we live, there's multitude of cultures, there's different languages, there's different styles of using those languages. You can't use Tanzanian Swahili in Kenya, and you can't use Kenyan Swahili in Tanzania. And so when we want to overcome some of these really critical barriers to communicate with our target audience, we have to think about new ways to do it. And especially in a social media world, how do we utilize social media in a way that maintains its social aspect while also improving its ability to address issues around peace building and mis and disinformation? And so what iFluence has done is we said, instead of just reusing it as another mass media channel, we need to target the right opinion leaders who are on social media. And I know a lot of us in this peace building space are often utilizing village elders and senior people, but really, who's creating those opinions amongst the youth as well, and working with them to utilize these trusted networks of peers, these social media networks, to drive a relatable and authentic conversation that can achieve a number of key goals, which are often building awareness and really engaging the public on an issue, and closing feedback loops, really hearing from the public. What are their needs? What do they want to discuss? How are they impacted by the issues that are surrounding them, so that we can use that feedback to then, again, create a communication campaign that addresses those needs. So what iFluence does is we actually utilize what are called micro and nano influencers, and I'll get into what those are defined as, but we work with those influencers, and we call them iFluencers, where we work with them to create their own content. So this is, again, quite different from the way media has traditionally been used, where that content is developed in a workshop or in a conference room and then given to the public. We actually try to work with our iFluencers to create their own messages, which are then guided by experts. So we don't want it to be a free-for-all, but we also want to hear their voices. So we guide that content, we review all of the content, and then they can post it across a leading social media network. So we work with posts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp. We really believe that we need to reach people in the places that they're engaging and they're absorbing media. And so we try to be flexible on how our iFluencers can get that content out. Now, the thing that's really interesting is, I know when I say the word influencer, everybody thinks of celebrities, and they think of people with millions of followers. And that is what an influencer traditionally is, right? They have a lot of visibility, but they don't have a lot of engagement, and not likely to actually come from the same spaces as their followers. And so someone once said, it's not about the size of the following, it's about the strength of the bond. This is a political strategist in the US had said that. And so that spoke to me, because it's what we do at iFluence. Is a micro influencer is somebody with 10,000 to 50,000 followers. And a nano influencer is somebody with 1,000 to about 10,000 followers. And so that is the group of people that we will work with. And while individually they all have lower visibility than a celebrity, together they actually can achieve the same reach. But the difference is they're actually engaged with that audience. They know them, they come from the same walks of life, they live in the same communities. And so rather than this feeling like a spokesperson speaking down to a public arena, it actually is intended to be more like a peer-to-peer engagement strategy, where people are coming from the same background, the same lifestyle, that they're, a couple degrees of separation rather than fans. And so we believe that this approach actually is quite unique and really important to achieving goals and really building that credible information strategy. And so how do we find these iFluencers? Well, this is where our AI technology comes into play. So there's, millions of people online. So how do you pick the right ones? Well, we start by using our AI to scan open social media profiles to understand how many followers somebody has, where they're located, who are their followers generally, what kind of topics have they discussed in the past. And so we can use our AI to actually scan these open social media profiles to find people who have a campaign affinity. Maybe they've talked about peace building in the past, or governance or democracy, and find those people who fit the bill. But we also want to make sure that their friends and followers on social media are part of our target audience. So you may end up with, a young person who has a big following. They talk about democracy and governance, but you're trying to run a campaign in Zimbabwe, and this person's following actually is all in Washington, D.C., because they've moved from D.C. to Zim, and their followers won't really be impacted by the messaging. So we need to make sure those two things match. We also want to make sure that their friends and followers on social media aren't bots, right? We can use the AI to say, are these authentic followers? We can also look to see how often they engage with their followers. Are they posting once a month? And so basically, this is where the AI helps us, is take that list of, 1 million people using social media and wean it down to a few hundred, right? And that's where our iFluencers come in. And so the whole theory behind kind of what I've explained in this model is what we call our trust ecosystem. So just a quick, mid-presentation summary. We are looking to work with the right people that are trusted and respected sources of information in their community. But we tried to break the mold to say it's not just, that they hold authority, but maybe in their group of other 20-something-year-old friends, they're the person you turn to because they're the person that is most informed or cares the most or reads the news or whatever that might be. The way that we just define right people isn't necessarily the same traditional mechanisms. The second aspect is we want them to share the right message. And I'll go into this a bit further, but we want messages that are personal and authentic, that there's a many sizes fits all approach to the content. So the reason that I trust the American system for counting ballots might be different from somebody else on the call, and let us both explain our reasons. But the idea is that we both trust the system. And so that's the goal, is everybody can explain their perception in a way that works for them. And it can also then be more flexible in the way that they share it linguistically or ethnically, and they can be more culturally sensitive and address the needs of their small peer groups rather than being assigned a line or a hashtag or something that must be said, but actually more a vision of the messaging in total, so they can share it in the right way. And then the messages need to be adaptive. And this is a big part of where our technology helps, but also the fact that we collaborate with our partners on a kind of full service basis. Is we want to hear, we want to see what's working and what's not working in our messaging. And then we want to change those messages accordingly. And our technology helps us understand this, and just our closeness with our iFluencers help us build this relationship to get that feedback. And so one of the things that's also, I think, really interesting about this, and I was at a meeting just last week with GIZ discussing the idea of the gig economy and how much it plays a huge role in the societies in which many of us in Africa are living in, and how much the gig economy contributes to some sort of youth employment and youth empowerment. But the traditional method for messaging a community starts with funds that come from maybe a donor or maybe a government, and then they go to an ad agency and a marketing firm who then creates a flyer or a poster. Maybe they create some sort of online tool, and then that money goes to printing those posters, to radio, TV, ad buy, to Facebook, YouTube, and Google ads. Basically, the money never actually touches the community that it's trying to reach. And so the question I beg to ask is, how are the beneficiaries benefiting from this model as well? And I think many of us know that, aligned with Peacebuilding is some sort of empowerment, but beyond empowerment is employment. And so the iFluence model is not an intention to bring full-time employment to people, but to make sure that they're part of this process as well, and not just in a focus group discussion from the beginning, but the funds that start at the organization that funnel through iFluence then hires people from our target communities to promote the key messages. And those target communities are given stipends and skills to build these campaigns. And that's, I think, a really important distinctive component of our approach. And the reason, again, looking back at that pyramid I shared, which is instead of the money going to a celebrity at the top, it's really going to trickle down to the people who are in need of some stipends and some support at the bottom. We work quite a lot with female influencers. I was looking at a campaign today that we ran in Tanzania that actually had 75% of our influencers were female on that campaign. Now, it really does shift between who the target audience, that target audience was women mostly, but I think it's really important to note that we work with women. It allows them to work from home, work part-time. Many of the campaigns target women, and it's a peer-to-peer communication. And then it provides supplemental income as well, as I mentioned, for women who are often doing unpaid or underpaid labor. So a bit about kind of the campaign steps and the processes we take. So we start with our iFluence platform that I mentioned that helps us take that Venn diagram and find the people in the middle. What happens at that point is once we've identified a few hundred people, we start sending them outreach messages, mostly through DMs, to invite them, to inform them of a campaign we're intending to run and see who's interested. We also do a manual audit of each of the profiles to ensure that it aligns with some of our intentions. So, for a recent campaign we ran in Kenya, we found a lot of people interested, and we had to make sure that they hadn't been posting any partisan content about the upcoming election. And then we also had to tell them, look, if you want to work with us on a campaign, you're not allowed to post anything about a certain side or a certain party. And so we do go through a process that is human-centered, that takes us away from just the technology and to a bit of reality. And I think that's a necessity in working in the social media space is it can't all be automated, and it also helps when it's not all kind of handwritten. So we start with that, where we kind of screen them and then contract them. And then we provide our influencers with a campaign brief and support the development of a campaign strategy. And so what this means is we may know the goal. So for example, in Kenya, the goal of 2 of our campaigns was to promote peace in the presidential election and ensure that we had all of our communications to support civic engagement whilst also promoting peaceful resolution should the election not go the way people want it. And aligned with that, we made sure that each week of the campaign was different. The reason you vote might be one week. How you can register to vote might be a different week. What you believe that the system lacks might be a third week, so we could get some information back and decide on the 4th week to address some of the concerns of the community. So each week, we don't want it to feel like a radio ad that just keeps playing over and over. We want it to feel like that social part where things develop and change over time. And then once the campaign goes live, we use the iFluence platform to monitor and evaluate the outcomes in real time. And when I say outcomes, mostly we're looking at communication outcomes. So how many people are reached, how many people are engaging with the content, and what kind of feedback are we getting from the public? And so here's a really quick screenshot of some of the posts that went live from a campaign that we had here in Kenya. So, and some of the profiles. So here we can see on the top left, you have somebody's Twitter account. They've got a little Kenyan flag. We also know that they are a Chelsea FC fan, and they say they're a young businessman and let's have a nice time. But they've got 15.3 thousand followers. So we know that they're a micro influencer. And here we've got an example of a post in English where they're just promoting that now that the election's been announced, we need a peaceful country. Let's stick with us. In the middle, we've got a post that was originally in Swahili, and we've translated it here to talk, and it's got some images with it as well, encouraging people that their vote counts. And then on the right, you see an Instagram account. They have 2,800 followers, and you can see that they've pinned some of their posts that relate to peace building and relate to the election on top, and that they've created other content as well, using a combination of stock photos. And we've got a little image of somebody in their graduation cap. So it is a bit mixed between, how people are communicating in the style that they use. So I never know exactly where to put this slide. So I know it's a bit maybe out of tune, but where we work, I've shared an example from Kenya. That's where we've done most of our peace building work so far. But we also have an office in India. We've got an English and a French speaking team, and we have worked on mostly health campaigns across all of these other countries in Africa. And we're continuing to grow because we're focused on the ability of technology. We're able to work pretty much in any African country that, that has a high enough social media penetration rate to justify it. So I want to go into, one key use case I think might be interesting. And this is the one we worked with the US government, their DRL division, on a project called Umoja kwa Amani. This was led by Mercy Corps and iFluence, supported over a 9-month period leading up to the 2022 elections. And there was 3 key things that we engaged upon. First, we wanted to talk to citizens and raise awareness about their responsibility in all phases of the election. So from registration, primaries, voting, after voting, if there is an undecided outcome, if the courts get involved. I mean, in Kenya, this has happened pretty much every year. So we wanted to make sure that citizens were aware of all of these things. We wanted to detect and counter hate speech, misinformation, or disinformation as it may come up, and really educate the public about that it exists and what to look out for, and then provide early warning information that could be used in an early response. So really alerting the public of what tools are out there for them to utilize to take on that responsibility of reporting issues as they see them. So we ran the campaign in 3 phases over 4 weeks during each phase. The 3rd phase taking place during the election, actually, which was really critical. And so what we saw that was really interesting, aside from kind of our posts and our engagement rate by reach, which I'll say a typical engagement rate by reach for a celebrity influencer is 1%. This is the number of engagements you have divided by the reach times 100. So a typical celebrity gets 1%, and then an average micro may have 2 to 3%. And so we can see that here our influencers are getting much higher engagement rates than traditionally, as I mentioned, probably because they are closest to their target audience. So the last thing I want to share is I did a bit of social listening to understand what were the general conversations taking place around the election. And in general, when you conduct social listening, most of that content is coming through Twitter. And we saw that there was only 17% positive sentiment when people were openly discussing the election on Twitter. Now, when we just looked at the comments on our Peace Champions posts, our iFluencers posts, 70% of them were positive, saying things like, "Thank you for sharing this. We really appreciate this. This is really important for our society. Let peace win." And so that was also a really interesting juxtaposition, is, really how people engage with this content is quite different than, I think, your research type of understanding would paint. Now, one of the things I mentioned in the beginning was feedback loops. And this is really, really important to us because it both guides our activities, but also can guide our partners' activities. And so one of the things we asked was, what are you most concerned about during and after the elections? And so we could see that by county, people had very different opinions. In Nairobi County, possible violence after the results had a lot more, it was significantly bigger concern for people in Nairobi than it was in the other 2 counties. But we do see that everybody is a bit concerned with whether elections are free, fair, and credible. And so we can use this information to say, okay, during the following week, what is the thing that we're going to talk about? Maybe that following week is going to be about violence after the results are contested. What are your rights? How do you report violence? How do you avoid violence? How do you, just generally communicate the repercussions of violence, etc. So that feedback loop is really important to us. And so just a couple pieces of what we really felt worked, and I think this might be my last slide. And so the first thing that we think worked was our briefings. The peace champions were provided succinct structures of what they can post. So we give them a theme. It's, a one slide on a PowerPoint with some bullet points of inspiration. But we also make sure we check in with them on a weekly basis. We give them enough time for content creation, usually at least 1 to 2 weeks ahead of creating that content. We review everything before it goes live. And so we can also give them feedback to say things like, this may not track, and can you make this adjustment, and giving them that approval. So they really felt like this helped them both be creative, but stay, aligned to the intentions of the project. There were educational materials provided by our partner. There's videos and images. There's other innovation organizations like iFluence here in Kenya that they exist in every country that are also creating great content. And so we linked to those orgs as well. So if they made a chat bot, or there's a group here that had a video game, there's a group here who had a comic book. Well, how come we can't promote those things too? And so that's what we did, is we boosted the credibility by accessing those other tools and making sure that our influencers cross-promoted them. The feedback loops, as I mentioned, were really important. They guided our weekly themes. They helped our partners determine what the priorities were. And then the early warning and early response hotlines that are run by the government agencies were shared widely to educate the public on how to report issues. And we also saw a lot of appreciation for that. I know here, I never saw a single post outside of ours promoting a lot of those early response, early warning hotlines. I live here in Nairobi. It would be good if I knew them. There's a polling station about a quarter mile from my house. So if I saw things happening, I would have had no idea how to report it, because they don't have the PR often to even promote the information. So this is a nice place to make sure that it gets out there. So that's my presentation. I hope that was helpful and interesting, and looking forward to questions and response. I think, we've got 30 minutes for that.
Thank you so much, Jamie. So I'm gonna, yes, we are segueing into the Q&A session. If you have a question, do feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question. So I'm going to first have Frederick ask his question, and just going to, Frederick, if you could unmute yourself. I'm not sure if he's able to. You can also drop your question in the chat. So Milton, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jamie, for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. I have a couple of questions, and I think you began answering some of them, but I think I'll limit this round to just two. The first is, what's the level of engagement between the different influencers? Do they get to speak to each other, like each other's posts, respond, and so forth whenever they post content? Are there hashtags? Does the organization then repost, reshare the content? I think that's my first question. And the second question is, what's the level of co-creation and power sharing between the organization, between influencers, and then the champions themselves? Is there a sense that they have control of a real sense that they have control of the message, and they can speak within the guidelines and yet put out a message that speaks to their reality and kind of their message? And then the third question that I had had to do with conflict with the government, because more often than not, people who are interested in advocacy will be aligned with civil society or opposition parties, and this brings with it the risk of government harassment, arrest, and so on and so forth. So how do you deal with that? So thank you.
Yeah, those are brilliant questions. So I'm going to start with the easy ones, the beginning ones. Thanks, Milton. So the level of engagement between the influencers, they are all put into a WhatsApp group together so that they can have discussions as a team. We also host a weekly or bi-weekly virtual call with them to check in and see, you know, what are you experiencing, what are you hearing, so that they can share their experiences together and inspire one another. So we try to make sure that they are well engaged with one another and not kept in silos as well. And I think that's especially important with peace building, where sometimes it can feel lonely. Sometimes you are having, you know, run-ins with potential government issues, or, you know, you feel like you need to share something. And so we want to make sure that they have that together. Now, in terms of hashtags, we don't typically use hashtags unless it is part of something that's already organically taking place online. So, you know, youth vote, or like power to the people, maybe that's a saying that's already happening. Great, you can use it. But we didn't use Umoja Kwa Amani or UCA or USAID or any of these things, because it's a bit insincere. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the message that people are trying to get across. So we try to separate those two. And the other thing is with hashtags, they're really mostly used for Twitter, and but not necessarily on Facebook or Instagram. And so we try not to define the project by a hashtag, but rather by the quality of the content that's being created. In terms of, does the organization repost the content? iFluence does not repost any content or boost it. Our partners may choose to do so. So if we are promoting a video game and one of our influencers creates a post linking people to that video game, the creator may choose to like or repost it. But we don't have any, you know, hard and fast rules about every time an influencer posts, iFluence then goes in and reposts or anything like that. That we try to keep separate, again, because we want to build this peer-to-peer engagement that's organic and authentic, rather than, you know, from top down saying celebrities and organizations and hashtags and all these things that oftentimes you and I just will intentionally scroll past. And how do we avoid that? The influencers do know each other, and so they may, you know, cross post and comment and engage, but that's because they're from the same communities as well. So it does fit in with that, but it's not an assignment and it's not a requirement most of the time. In terms of the co-creation, we try to give them as much leverage as possible in making their message that aligns by giving them overall themes. That being said, knowing that peace building is often, you know, kind of a tricky conversation. We also, you know, have to do some due diligence on the content. But I think it also depends on country and what's the piece that we're building around. And so that is a bit flexible, what level of co-creation takes place. But we don't give any lines. We don't say you have to say this exact wording. We don't say you have to share this, you know, statement. We don't even say like you have to tell everybody they have to vote, right? It's, you know, how is voting important to you, or why do you think voting matters, right? And so if you believe that voting is this, that, and the other, you can explain it as you need to. The last piece is conflict with the government, and I think this is a really important one. So iFluence tries to never have anything politically aligned, encouraging people to vote, encouraging people not to choose violence, encouraging people to know their, know the early warning responses. That's where we try to stick, is this kind of in-between place, alerting people how to detect mis and disinformation. We try to stay in between. We don't want to, put our influencers at any undue risk. And so that's where we've come to date. We haven't worked somewhere challenging like Zimbabwe yet. And I think it's also really important to know that we're always checking in with our influencers to make sure they're comfortable with continuing. So if there's any point when they say, look, this topic is just too risky for me, or I don't feel comfortable anymore, they're allowed to exit their contract. We'll pay them up until the point where they stopped posting. And then they can leave, no ill will, no bad feelings, if they feel like they're at risk for some reason too. So I think that was most of them.
Thank you, Jamie. That was a very comprehensive answer. Okay, Frederick, I see that your hand is up again, so I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself. Okay, looks like you are.
Yes. Thank you. Let me put my video on. I'm not in the best spaces,
Hey, Frederick.
but I'll put my video on so that. Yeah, Jamie, nice to see you. I saw you wanting to present, so I said I have to come through and support your work. Of course, it's very nice to see you again, and I think I'm happy that you're making this presentation out of some serious work that I'm aware you are doing in Kenya. I think I would want to speak to the other aspect of it, which is the Umoja kwa Amani, which you know very well that I was somewhere in the shadows of that campaign, but as a consultant, having done for them a baseline study on the Umoja kwa Amani campaign itself. So my question boils around the idea of local evidence generation, and also locally led intervention, the value of collaboration, and the idea of appraising local voices. Because I know somewhere in between, we got lost. Because I do remember that you worked a little bit with Maskani, some of Maskani members from the Peacemakers Co Foundation. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that that we did found out some interesting stuff about one of the locations that Umoja kwa Amani was based. That is actually three. That was Kisumu, Uasin Gishu, and Nakuru. So my fear is that part of what we found out points to the lack of seriousness in terms of also listening to local voices and letting their evidence count as part of this bigger intervention. So if you go grassroots, the grassroots initiatives get lost when they go upwards into global interventions to the level where influence is and massacres. How can you address that, Jamie, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is a challenge we face. iFluence is a Kenyan organization. We're also local, but I think this is a bigger structural perception of how do we ensure that the local organizations that are in the country, from the country, are prioritized in these activities as the funding flows down from the greater powers that be through often INGOs, but then doesn't end up with a really small piece on the end, but actually is maintained to uplift local partners that are close to the ground. But unfortunately, I'm not part of one of those large INGOs. I've never been, so I may not be the most helpful in that space.
Thank you, Jamie. Over to Thomas, I believe, was next.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Jamie, for the excellent presentation and the answers you've given so far. They've been really interesting. So I'm curious if maybe not in the sectors you've worked with directly, or you've heard in regards to Affluencer generally, if you've had pushback like on this process as a whole, and like the idea of using nano and micro influencers to kind of like push certain campaigns. Because I'm thinking in the context that I kind of like research and work in, a lot of the distrust within communities is directed at the way media is being shared and the tactics and the campaigns and the tools being used. So the idea of like an international company directing local influencers to push a certain message, no matter how seemingly apolitical it is, would be nightmare fuel for some of the people that we're kind of like working with. So I'm just wondering if Affluencer has had any pushback about like its process specifically. If so, how did it respond? And if not, how do you think it would respond?
Yeah, so I mean, look, we always get these questions and people are always a bit suspicious, but my pushback on that is bad people are using social media in bad ways already. And if we don't step up to the plate to use social media in good ways, we're just going to let bad actors win. And so it's definitely a tricky situation, but if you just completely put our head in the sand and say, well, it's risky and there's a question mark about it, we're never going to win. And if we can, use social media for good, where we believe in it, and use it apolitically and use it to teach people about finding misinformation or not accidentally sharing it, how could we, as people who want to do good in the world on this call, avoid the fact that we know that this is an option and it's worked for the bad guys? So can we make it work for the good ones too, is my honest perception of it. I think the second thing that comes with it is we don't brand anything, right? We leave it all unbranded. So that helps on a little bit of that backlash that can happen. So it's not going to say hashtag UN, this, or hashtag USAID, or hashtag UK government. We try to let the ideas speak from people locally who care about these things, and run that way.
Thank you, Jamie. I think Tarek, you had your hand up and I accidentally put it down. So I'm going to have you go next. I apologize for that.
No problem, Nick. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for the presentation. Of great interest, as I'm involved with somewhat of a similar project. So I hope it's all right if I reach out to you also offline. I think my questions go back to one of the earlier slides, which talked about the differentiating the superstars from the micro and nano influencers. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you how do you measure visibility versus what were the engagement, and what was the third? So how do you break it down?
Was it conversion? Tarek?
Conversion, that's right.
Yeah.
So how do you define those? And then how did you, I was particularly interested to know why was engagement higher for micro influencers than nano influencers, but generally there was a trend of engagement and conversion becoming less as you went up that pyramid. So I'm just curious about what do you think is the reasoning behind that, and whether that's across all different contexts that you're finding that. And then lastly, if you don't mind, also, how do you identify the AI influencers that you're using, and particularly knowing that they are reaching the audiences that you're trying to target? How do you make that analysis or assessment?
Sure. So yeah, the reach is determined by how many people or how many accounts see each post. So, your first post, it's really determined by that, kind of similar to impressions, is reach. So if you have 1 million followers and I have 1,000, your reach is going to be 1 million and mine's 1,000. So that's the difference for reach. And engagement is defined by likes, comments, clicks, reshares, and responses to poll questions. So that's kind of, okay, I saw the thing you posted, now I'm going to do something about it, right? It's that second layer that you've processed it. So this is where social media has a huge advantage on traditional media is, you can say we printed X amount of posters or ran X amount of radio ads, but this is actually that two-way interaction. And then the third is conversion. Now, conversion is really hard to measure actually in the peace building space. It fits quite well when I do that slide for health. We could say, okay, this is many people went to a clinic. It's hard to say like this many people would have rioted and now they didn't riot, or, that kind of thing. So it's not necessarily the best measurement in peace building in that perspective. And so in terms of kind of those stars, it's more of a general assumption is the reason conversion happens better at the bottom. If you're thinking from a health perspective, it's because I can say, I go to the clinic, I go to Columbia Clinic on this road, and people who see it are going to go, oh yeah, I drive by that also every day because Jamie is someone like me. If she says that this is a good clinic, that's a place I trust too. So, that's where that conversion happens better for nanos. Whereas if Jennifer Aniston said that to you, you'd be like, that's not helpful, right? Like, I have no idea where she lives, different state, different life. We're not the same. So that's why conversion, actually, we believe it is better suited when you're more similar to the person talking about it. The second question you asked is, how do we identify influencers we use? So as I mentioned, that the AI really helps take us from everybody to kind of find people by location, by how many followers they have, by potentially kind of their age group. So for the UCA project, we were working with young people. So we really focused on this 18 to 24-year-old group. We looked for some people who might be students, some people who are motorcycle drivers. So we could find some of those things within their profiles as well. And so that really helped bring it down to a smaller group. And then it's a lot of just kind of outreach to the profiles that fit those requirements, and seeing who bites and who's interested in participation. Each campaign can have a slightly different requirement. We're quite flexible on that. So when we work, as I mentioned, in health, we have a lot of community health workers. This project had a lot more students because they're who we really need to ensure are maintaining peace. So there is some flexibility at that point as well.
So are you're going like searching through different profiles across different platforms that fits those?
Yeah, the AI is doing that for us initially. So we do, so it does it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Critically to say, it only looks at open social media profiles. So if you have a private Instagram account, we will not find you. And so one of the things we also sometimes engage with is like a find your friend strategy. So if you know that your friend has a huge influence, they have maybe 10,000 followers, but their profile's on private, and you think that they'd be a really huge asset, we say, look, invite them. If they're willing to make their profile open, we can work with them on this campaign too, because the tech didn't find them, but they're fantastic. And so we do try to also be flexible in that sense.
Thank you, Jamie. I actually was going to ask the same question personally about the private versus public profiles. Okay, Raju, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Great presentation, Jamie. Thank you so much. My mother's from Kenya, my father's from Uganda, and I heard you mention Tanzania. So that's East Africa right there. So Jambo, wondering what is Uganda doing? And also, I'm starting a dialogue in Kashmir through the Dialogue Lab. And we're going to be having a dialogue between all different factions, get them all in the same room, make a movie out of it. And then we're turning it into virtual reality clips. So people can put those virtual reality clips in. And I don't know if Facebook one day will have that kind of mechanism where we can just plug into them, but I think they're working hard on it. So there's a lot of fun things happening. I've been doing this work all through the pandemic, and I have not stopped. And so I'm pretty excited that this is coming out now, this virtual reality. So I wanted to share that with you, that is there any virtual reality options or possibilities? Because that really invokes empathy at a very exponential way. And also, are you all able to partner up with like Facebook VR? You know, that division's growing so fast, and there's got to be grants and something available to help you guys get VR glasses. Everybody gets to look through them. And maybe Uganda one day will be one, might want to join. But my father was born in Kaliro and he grew up in Kampala. My mother was born in Mombasa and she grew up in Nairobi. And it's kind of fresh for me because it was her birthday yesterday, but she passed away about 2 months ago. So it's all new, and timing is good. So I just wanted to see what your reflections were, and I'll mute.
Cool. So we haven't worked in Uganda yet. So that's driven by grants and funding that's available for peace building in Uganda. So that we haven't gone in, and VR, again, the sets aren't widely available. So I think most of the funding we receive is looking to make sure we reach as many people as possible. We could always cross promote anything that was happening in the VR space. But of course, we need to make sure that anything that we're discussing is really available for the population that we're able to reach at this point in time. But yeah, let me turn it back to, I guess, the next question.
Thanks, Jamie. Ted, and then Lena.
Hi, I guess I'd like to follow up a bit on the
Ted, you're muted.
outsider.
Oh, never mind. You dropped out for a second, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess my question sort of becomes the sort of the relationship between who you're mapping and tapping in social media and sort of outside structures, and where this works and where this doesn't. And I'll give a concrete example. I worked with Ushahidi in Nairobi in 2012, 2017, and when
Ted, you dropped again. Like, here's a little, yeah, there are gaps.
Okay, sorry, I gotta improve my mic here. What worked in Nairobi is very different from what worked elsewhere. Are you able to sort of use that as part of your way of doing this?
So what I heard was that what works in Nairobi doesn't necessarily work elsewhere. And do we think about that as we build our process? Is that accurate, Ted?
Yeah, sorry about the bad connection. No, it's really thinking about offline social networks as social networks. And can you map offline as well as online and feed that into your program?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're a startup. We do a couple things. And so for me right now, we haven't gone to offline networking. I don't think we're robust enough to understand it. We're not kind of networking experts. That being said, there is a nice interplay between online and offline at times. So what happened in our last campaign was we engaged boda riders, motorcycle riders here. And they said, well, we really wish you'd given us more empowerment to have a ride for peace, right? They wanted to take it offline. They didn't just want to use social media. And we're so excited, but of course, like we could never have budgeted or planned. I mean, the logistics of our work do come into play as well. We couldn't have anticipated that they'd want to do more, and because they really believed in it. So often the offline goes back to our kind of sector expert partnerships, because we're not sector experts in peace building or in offline, networking. We're experts in, can you use social media in a new way that will reach more people? And so, yeah, I think we're always keen to explore these things, but we do have our limitation as a very small Kenyan startup too.
Good luck. Thanks for a great talk.
Sure. And actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of relate that to a question that came in from Jonathan, which is, you mentioned the context of a campaign assessing a country and region social media penetration. Can you speak to that and how the determination exists? From my perspective, it's not hard and fast, but what percentage of the population is on social media, and how many people are we trying to reach? So for example, in Kenya, we have millions of people on social media, but we have a lot of problems in the northern borders by Somalia, and the social media penetration up there is minimal, right? You probably have like 16 people online. So it's just not worth it for iFluence to try to influence this community who's rarely on social media. So we're happy to tell you no from the start. If you come in at another places, Malawi, for example, Malawi is an incredible country, but there's only about a million people online. That's a high estimate. And there's 10 million adults. So that's 10% of your adult population. And if you're trying to reach people who are, maybe in outside and in rural areas, they're probably not the people on social media. So it is important to think that through, and we're happy to be honest and say, we're just not the partner for it.
Thank you. Lena, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie, for this. Two reflections and a question. I mean, I do love the fact that you're like, let's use this ad money to actually help people, right? And I think that's great. And then second is that I imagine you always get this criticism that like you're manipulating people, right? Which is exactly the same thing that people do when they say, please show up and promote Nike on your Facebook, right? It's also manipulation, which can also lead to those people who were selected because they're trusted losing their credibility. You know, with what you've shared today, it sounds like you're trying to do things in a way that really won't harm their trust and credibility, you know? And I'm speaking to you from Beirut, where I'm visiting my team here in Lebanon. We did something similar where we were trying to promote influencers who could have a voice around Lebanese Syrian cohesion, right? And very distinctly finding people who would be okay with actually, you know, finding their voice in those kinds of messages. But similarly to the way you said that you have created these WhatsApp groups between the influencers and even having the Boda drivers wanting more, it's you're actually identifying a whole new group of change makers, right? Who probably need more engagement and more interaction, and maybe would think differently about their own understanding of the message, and maybe even be able to offer right back up to the message creators what the message should be. So I just, you know, wanted to share those reflections and see. It sounds like you've been feeling similarly with the engagement, but any further thoughts on that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think that there's two things too, is like, one, we know people who just talk about climate change, right? I think we all know someone who's always posting about climate change twice, 3 times, 10 times a week, right? And so that makes sense. I mean, we've gotten used to it in some sectors. So can we normalize it in others as well? Because I think it's something that affects many people. The second thing actually is we do try to limit, you know, how much people are posting. If you post every day for 6 weeks, everyone's going to be like, oh my God, you're driving me bonkers, right? Like, and who has enough to create? Then they're going to start repeating themselves. So in order to mitigate that, instead of like, you know, 10 posts a day, keep going, we say 2 to 3 posts a week is enough. People will see it. If the algorithm plays out that you didn't see the first post, maybe you'll see the second post. It tracks in your daily life. You can talk about football on Monday. You can post about this on Tuesday. You could talk about your kids on Wednesday. Like, we don't dictate the other stuff that they're posting, personal life, not like, yeah, we will say you can't post anything political while you're doing this campaign. But yeah, we try to minimize how much that they post so that they don't lose the authenticity with their followers. And we also do try to stop working with everybody after about probably 8 to 10 weeks. After that point, again, you start losing your creativity, and then it just kind of gets boring. Especially if you look at this Kenyan example, which was election was over, election was peaceful, everything case closed, no problem. So we just said, okay, now we're gonna, instead of posting 3 times, you're gonna post once, and then we're gonna close the campaign and move on also. So I think that helps as well. I know we've got 2 minutes left. I want to let Will jump in if that's okay. He's got, I think, the last hand up.
Yep.
Hi, good to see you, Jamie, and great presentation. Unfortunately, my Wi-Fi dropped out, so I may have missed some pieces of it, but I had one specific question and then a more general question. I think you may have just answered part of the general question. The first one was building on Thomas's earlier question. I'm curious, I mean, the Kenyan social media environment is sophisticated. And I'm thinking of, you know, going back to the 17 campaigns and the political operatives using social media campaigns within the different blocks. And so I'm wondering what lessons might you have kind of bumping up against kind of politically driven partisan, you know, if you want to say political manipulation campaigns. What lessons do you have of your campaigns bumping up against those in the kind of social media environment there? Lessons that might be applicable in other environments. And then the second one is, and you may have addressed this in the presentation, and I think you got at it a little bit there with Lena's comment, but if you could speak a little more about authentic conversations, and you kind of hinted at it there, I think, with allow, you know, in the sense of allowing the folks working with you, the influencers, to kind of continue doing their football posting as well as the posting that you're doing. But if you could speak a little bit about authentication vis-a-vis other kind of strategic communications notions. Thank you.
Sure. So bumping up against the politically motivated content, I think from my side, it's a lot about understanding how you can teach people to understand disinformation, but and kind of addressing that, I think is a big piece. I was just on a call about misinformation that there was some really interesting research. I'm going to send it to Nick and he can send it to the group about how you can teach people about how to identify headlines that are worthy or not worthy of being shared, right? And that I think the biggest thing we saw from people is that they wanted to know how to identify mis and disinformation, which I think goes well aligned with kind of a politically motivated machine, right? And that content that can bump up against it because they want to also feel like, is this real or is this fake? And I think it's not it's not something that we have a firm answer to. It's something that's definitely evolving, and we're not experts in the political sphere. And so we also definitely rely on our partnerships and on research to say, okay, what's our answer? And do we have one? I think it's, to be frank with you, it's still in development. It's definitely not finalized. And then in terms of kind of that authentic conversation, yeah, this is where we have a few things. One, no, we don't hashtag unless that hashtag is relevant or already exists. You know, Kenya decides was a big hashtag that already existed. So you can say Kenya decides, but Umoja kwa Amani, not so much. It wasn't a thing. The second authenticity is, yeah, you can talk about your regular topics. You can post on whichever platform works for you. If you don't use Twitter, don't use Twitter. If you don't post on your Instagram wall and you use your Instagram story, great, let's do that. If you've never spoken in English and you only use Shang, keep up with that. So we want people to follow the platforms and the methods that they already use. We want them to keep doing the things that already work and keep people engaged. We actually saw recently on a post from some research from last week that selfies, that when people posted selfies, they were getting a lot more engagement than when they posted a stock photo. So can we continue that, right? If you think about, we try to just bring it back to logic. You know, and if this is the thing that already works, can we keep doing that and align it with the campaign to improve that part?
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, we are at time, so we're going to wrap up, but thank you, everybody. This was I'm very grateful for all of your participation and your active questions and listening. So thank you. I will be sure to add the people who have requested to be added to the mailing list. I will send out the recording of the session. The session will be posted on our YouTube channel and on AFP's website. Jamie, if you could just send along those resources you had mentioned, and I can include those in the follow-up. And Jamie, if it's okay with you, I'll probably just CC you in my follow-up note to the community of practice, so people have your contact information and they can connect for further questions or conversation. Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody. Happy
Jamie.
early
Thanks,
American Thanksgiving, not Canadian Thanksgiving. Happy early Thanksgiving. And we will see you soon. Okay.